The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart, Book 5, The Coming of the Bear. 6. We had a wild ride to Cornwall. Easter that year had fallen as early as it ever falls, so we were barely out of winter and into spring, when, on a black, wild night, we halted our horses on the cliff-top near Tintagel, and peered down into the teeth of the wind. There were only the four of us, Uther, myself, Ulfin, and Cadel. Everything so far had gone smoothly and according to plan. It was getting on toward midnight on the 24th of March. Igraine had obeyed me to the letter. I had not dared that night in London to go straight from her quarters to Uther's chamber, in case this should be reported to Golois. But in any case, Uther would be asleep. I had visited him early next morning while he was being bathed and made ready for the crowning. He sent the servants away, except for Ulfin, and I was able to tell him exactly what he must do. He looked the better for his drugged sleep, greeted me briskly enough, and listened with eagerness in the bright hollow eyes.
And she will do as you say?
Yes, I have her word. Will you?
You know that I will.
He regarded me straightly.
And now, will you not tell me about the outcome?
I told you, a child.
Oh, that.
He hunched an impatient shoulder.
You are like my brother. He thought of nothing else. Still working for him, are you?
You might say so.
Well, I must get one sooner or later, I suppose. No. I meant Golois. What will come to him? There's a risk, surely.
Nothing is done without risk. You must do the same as I. You must take the time on trust. But I can tell you that your name and your kingdom will survive the night's work. A short silence. He measured me with his eyes.
From you, I suppose that is enough. I am content.
You do well to be. You will outlive him, Uther.
He laughed suddenly. God's grief, man! I could have prophesied that myself. I can give him 30 years, and he's no stay-at-home when it comes to war, which is one good reason why I refuse to have his blood on my hands. So on that same account,
he turned then to Ulfin and began to give his orders. It was the old Uther back again, brisk, concise, clear. A messenger who was to go immediately to Caerleon, and troops to be dispatched from there to North Cornwall. Uther himself would travel there straight from London as soon as he was able, riding fast with a small bodyguard to where his troops would be encamped. In this way, the king could be hard on Golois's heels, even though Golois would leave today, and the king must stay, feasting his peers for 4 more long days. Another man was to ride out immediately along our proposed route to Cornwall, and see that the good horses were ready at short stages all the way. So it came about as I had planned. I saw Igraine at the crowning, still composed, erect, and with downcast eyes, and so pale that if I had not seen her the night before, I myself would have believed her story true. I shall never cease to wonder at women. Even with power, it is not possible to read their minds. Duchess and slut alike, they need not even study to deceive. I suppose it is the same with slaves, who live with fear, and with those animals who disguise themselves by instinct to save their lives. She sat through the long, brilliant ceremony like wax, which at any moment may melt to collapse. Then afterwards, I caught a glimpse of her, supported by her women, leaving the throng as the bright pomp moved slowly to the hall of feasting. About halfway through the feast, when the wine had gone round well, I saw Golois, unmarked, leave the hall with 1 or 2 other men who were answering the call of nature. He did not come back. Uther, to one who knew the truth, may not have been quite so convincing as Igraine, but between exhaustion and wine, and his ferocious exultation at what was to come. He was convincing enough. Men talked among themselves in hushed voices about his rage when he discovered Gorlois's absence, and his anger, and his angry vows to take vengeance as soon as his royal guests had gone. If that anger were a little overloud, and his threats too fierce against the Duke, whose only fault was the protection of his own wife, the king had been intemperate enough before for men to see this as part of the same picture, and so bright now was Uther's star, so dazzling the lustre of the crowned Pendragon, that London would have forgiven him a public rape. They could less easily forgive Igraine for having refused him. So we came to Cornwall. The messenger had done his work well, and our ride in hard, short stages of no more than 20 miles apiece took us 2 days and a night. We found our troops waiting encamped at the place selected, a few miles in from Hercules Point and just outside the Cornish border, with news that, however she had managed it, Igraine was fast in Tintagel with a small body of picked men, while her husband, with the rest of his force, had descended on Dimilioch and sent a call round for the men of Cornwall to gather to defend the Duke. He must know of the presence of the king's troops so near his border, but no doubt he would expect them to wait for the king's coming, and could have as yet no idea that the king was already there. We rode secretly into our camp at dusk, and went not to the king's quarters, but to those of a captain he could trust. Cadel was there already, having gone ahead to prepare the disguises which I meant us to wear, and to await Ralph's message from Tintagel when the time was ripe. My plan was simple enough, with the kind of simplicity that often succeeds, and it was helped by Gorlois's habit, since his marriage, of riding back nightly where he could from Dimilioch or his other fortresses to visit his wife. I suppose there had been too many jests about the old man's fondness, and he had formed the habit, Rafe had told me, of riding back secretly, using the private gate, a hidden postern to which access was difficult unless one knew the way. My plan was simply to disguise Uther, Ulfin, and myself to pass. If we were seen as Gorlois and his companion and servant, and ride to Tintagel by night, Rafe would arrange to be on duty at the postern, and would meet us and lead us up the secret path. Igraine had by some means persuaded Gorlois, this had been the greatest danger, not to visit her himself that night, and would dismiss all her women but Marcia. Rafe and Cadel had arranged between them what clothes we should wear. The Cornwall party had ridden from London in such a hurry on the night of the coronation feast that some of their baggage had been left behind, and it was simple to find saddle clothes with the blazon of Cornwall, and even one of Gorlois's familiar war cloaks with the double border of silver. Rafe's latest message had been reassuring. The time was ripe, the night black enough to hide us and wild enough to keep most men within doors. We set off after it was full dark, and the 4 of us slipped out of camp unobserved. Once clear of our own lines, we went at a gallop for Tintagel, and it would have been only the keen eye of suspicion which could have told that this was not the Duke of Cornwall, with 3 companions riding quickly home to his wife. Uther's beard had been greyed, and a bandage came down one side of his face to cover the corner of his mouth and give some reason, should he be forced to talk, for any strangeness in his speech. The hood of his cloak, pulled down low as was natural on such a fierce night, shadowed his features. He was straighter and more powerful than Gorlois, but this was easy enough to disguise. And he wore gauntlets to hide his hands, which were not those of an old man. Ulfin passed well enough as one Jordan, a servant of Gorlois, whom we had chosen as being the nearest to Ulfin's build and colouring. I myself wore the clothes of Brithael, Gorlois's friend and captain. He was an older man than I, but his voice was not unlike mine, and I could speak good Cornish. I have always been good at voices. I was to do what talking proved necessary. Cadel came with us undisguised. He was to wait with the horses outside and be our messenger if we should need one. I rode close to the king and set my mouth to his ear. The castle's barely a mile from here. We ride down to the shore now. Rafe will be there to show us in. I'll lead on. He nodded. Even in the ragged flying dark, I thought I saw the gleam in his eyes. The gleam of his eyes, I added. And don't look like that, or they'll never think you're Gorlois, with years of married life behind you. I heard him laugh, and when I wheeled my horse and led the way carefully down the rabbit-ridden slope of scrub and scree into the head of the narrow valley which leads toward the shore. This valley is little more than a gully, carrying a small stream to the sea. At its widest, the stream is no more than 3 paces broad, and so shallow that a horse can ford it anywhere. At the foot of the valley, the water drops over a low cliff straight to a beach of slanty shingle. We rode in single file down the track, with the stream running deep down on the left, and to our right a high bank covered with bushes. Since the wind was from the southwest, and the valley was deep and running almost north, we were sheltered from the gate, but at the top of the bank the bushes were screaming in the wind, and twigs and even small boughs hurtled through the air and across our path. Even without this, and the steepness of the stony path, and the darkness, it was not easy riding the horses, what with the storm, and some tension which must have been generated by the 3 of us. Cadel was as solid as a rock, but then he was not going into the castle. Were wild and white-eyed with nerves. When, a quarter of a mile from the sea, we turned down to the stream and set the beasts across it. Mine in the lead flattened its ears and balked, and when I had lashed it across and into a plunging counter up the narrow track, and a man's figure detached itself from the shadows ahead, beside the path, the horse stopped dead and climbed straight up into the air till I felt sure it would go crashing over backwards, and me with it. The shadow darted forward and seized the bridle, dragging the horse down. The beast stood, sweating and shaking. "Brithael," I said, "is all well?" I heard him exclaim, and he took a pace, pressing closer to the horse's shoulder and peering upwards in the dark. Behind me, Uther's grey hoisted itself up the track and thudded to a halt. The man at my horse's shoulder said uncertainly, "My lord Gorlois, we did not look for you tonight. Is there news, then?" It was Rafe's voice. I said in my own, "So we'll pass, at least in the dark." I heard his breath go in. "Yes, my lord, for the moment I thought it was indeed Brithael. And then the grey horse. Is that the king?" "For tonight," I said. "It is the Duke of Cornwall. Is all well?" "Yes, sir." "Then lead the way. There is not much time." He gripped my horse's bridle above the bit and led him on, for which I was grateful, as the path was dangerous, narrow and slippery, and twisting along the steep bank between the rustling bushes, not a path I would have wished to ride even in daylight on a strange and frightened horse. The others followed, Cadel's mount and Ulfin's, plodding steadily along, and close behind me the grey stallion, snorting at every bush and trying to break his rider's grip. But Uther could have ridden, Pegasus himself, and founded him before his own wrists even ached. Here my horse shied at something I could not see, stumbled and would have pitched me down the bank, but for Rafe at its head. I swore at it, and asked Rafe, "How far now?" "About 200 paces to the shore, sir, and we leave the horses there. We climb the promontory on foot." "By all the gods of the storm, I'll be glad to be under cover. Did you have any trouble?" "None, sir." He had to raise his voice to make me hear, but in that turmoil there was no fear of being heard more than 3 paces off. My lady told Felix himself, that's the porter, that she had asked the Duke to ride back as soon as his troops were disposed. A Dimalayak. Of course, the word's gone round that she's pregnant, so it's natural enough she'd want him back, even with the king's army so close. She told Felix the Duke would come by the secret gate, in case the king had spies posted already. He wasn't to tell the garrison, she said, because they might be alarmed at his leaving. Dimalayak and the troops there, but the king couldn't possibly be in Cornwall for another day at soonest. Felix doesn't suspect a thing. Why should he? The porter is always at the gate, yes, but there are 2 guards in the guard room. He had told us already what lay inside the postern. This was a small gate set low on the outer castle wall, and just inside it, a long flight of steps ran up to the right, hugging the wall. Halfway up was a wide landing with a guard room to the side. Beyond that, the stairs went up again, and at the top was the private door leading through into the apartments. Do the guards know? I asked. He shook his head. My lord, we didn't dare. All the men left with the Lady Igraine were hand-picked by the Duke. Are the stairs well lighted? A torch. I saw to it that it will be mostly smoke. I looked over my shoulder to where the grey horse came ghostly behind me through the dark. Rafe had to raise his voice to make me hear above the wind which screamed across the top of the valley, and I would have thought that the king would be waiting to know what passed between us. But he was silent, as he had been since the beginning of the ride. It seemed to me he was indeed content to trust the time, or to trust me. I turned back to Rafe, leaning over my horse's shoulder. Is there a password? Yes, my lord, it is Pilgrim, and the lady has sent a ring for the king to wear. It is one the Duke wears sometimes. Here is the end of the path. Can you see? It's quite a drop to the beach. He checked, steadying my horse. Then the beast plunged down, and its hooves grated on the shingle. We leave the horses here, my lord. I dismounted, thankfully. As far as I could see, we were in a small cove, sheltered from the wind by a mighty headland close to our left. But the seas, tearing past the end of the headland and curving round to break among the offshore rocks, were huge and came lashing down on the shingle in torrents of white, with a noise like armies clashing together in anger. Away to the right, I saw another high headland, and between the two, this roaring stretch of white water, broken by the teeth of black rocks. The stream behind us fell seawards over its low cliff in two long cascades which blew in the wind like ropes of hair. Beyond these swinging waterfalls, and in below the overhanging wall of the main cliff, there was shelter for the horses. Rafe was pointing to the great headland on our left. The path is up there. Tell the king to come behind me and follow closely. 1 foot wrong tonight, and before you could cry help, you'd be out with the tide as far as the western stars. The grey thudded down beside us, and the king swung himself out of the saddle. I heard him laugh, the same sharp, exultant sound, even had there been no prize at the end of the night's trail. He would have been the same. Danger was drink and dreams alike to Uther. The other 2 came up with us and dismounted, and Caleb took the reins. Uther came to my shoulder, looking at the cruel race of water. Do we swim for it now? It may come to that, God knows. It looks to me as if the waves are up to the castle wall. He stood quite still, oblivious to the buffeting of wind and rain, with his head lifted, staring up at the headland. High against the stormy dark, a light burned. I touched his arm. Listen. The situation is what we expected. There is a porter, Felix, and 2 men-at-arms in the guard-room. There should be very little light. You know the way in. It will be enough as we go in. If you grunt your thanks to Felix and go quickly up the stair, Marcia, the old woman, will greet you at the door of Igraine's apartments and lead you in. You can leave the rest to us. If there is any trouble, then there are 3 of us to 3 of them, and on a night like this there'll be no sound heard. I shall come an hour before dawn and send Marcia in for you. Now we shall not be able to speak again. Follow Rafe closely. The path is dangerous. He has a ring for you and a password. Go now." He turned without a word and trod across the streaming shingle to where the boy waited. I found Cadel beside me, with the reins of the 4 horses gathered in his fist. His face, like my own, was streaming with wet, his cloak billowing round him like a storm cloud. I said, "You heard me, an hour before dawn." He too was looking up at the crag, where high above us the castle towered. In a moment of flying light through the torn cloud, I saw the castle walls growing out of the rock. Below them fell the cliff, almost vertical to the roaring waves. Between the promontory and the mainland, joining the castle to the mainland cliff, ran a natural ridge of rock, its sheer side polished flat as a sword blade by the sea. From the beach where we stood, there seemed to be no way out but the valley. Not mainland fortress, nor causeways, nor castle rock could be climbed. It was no wonder they left no sentries here, and the path to the secret gate could be held by 1 man against an army. Cadel was saying, "I'll get the horses in there under the overhang, in what shelter there is, and for my sake, if not for yon lovesick gentleman's, be on time. If they as much as suspicion up yonder that there's something amiss, it's rats in a trap for the lot of us. They can shut that bloody little valley as sharp as they can block the causeway, you know that. And I wouldn't just fancy swimming out the other way myself." "Nor I. Content yourself, Cadel. I know what I'm about." "I believe you. There's something about you tonight. The way you spoke just now to the king, not thinking, shorter than you'd speak to a servant. And he said never a word, but did as he was bid. Yes, I'd say you know what you're about, which is just as well, Master Merlin, because otherwise you realize you're risking the life of the King of Britain for a night's lust." I did something which I had never done before, which I do not commonly do. I put a hand out and laid it over Cadel's, where it held the reins. The horses were quiet now, wet and unhappy, huddling with their rumps to the wind and their heads drooping. I said, "If Uther gets into the palace tonight and lies with her, then before God, Cadel, it will not matter as much as the worth of a drop of that sea foam there, if he is murdered in the bed. I tell you, a king will come out of this night's work, whose name will be a shield and a buckler to the men of this fair land. From sea to sea is smashed down into the sea that holds it. And men leave earth to live among the stars. Do you think Uther is a king, Cadel? He is but a regent for him who went before, and for him who comes after, the past and future king. And tonight he is even less than that. He is a tool, and she a vessel, and I am a spirit, a word, a thing of air and darkness. I can no more help what I am doing than a reed can help the wind of God blowing through it. You and I, Cadel, are as helpless as dead leaves in the waters of that bay." I dropped my hand from his. "An hour before dawn. Till then, my lord." I left him then, and with Ulfin following, went after Rafe and the king across the shingle to the foot of the black cliff. And that's the end of chapter 6.